What is your emergency?
Oh, my wife's not breathing. My wife, I just woke up. My wife's dead.
Donna Jones was the outgoing, ever-smiling member of a large circle of close friends. She was a loving, compassionate family woman who just wanted to be loved back. Until she met Mark Hutt.
She loved my spaghetti. She loved it to death.
What kind of life did this woman have?
4 years of relentless torment slowly drove her into isolation, before 12 days of unimaginable torture would eventually end her life. Hello and welcome to the Little Shop of Crime. My name is Steve, and in store today is a story that won't be easy to listen to. It's barbaric, so proceed with caution. And this case isn't very widely publicised, outside of Ottawa at least, so it should be new to most of you. And honestly, it's a story that deserves to be told. It's incredibly sad, but at the very least it could serve as a valuable warning to others. This is 12 Days of Hell, the heartbreaking case of Donna Jones. Today's tragic tale takes place in Canada's capital and fourth largest city, Ottawa. Situated in southern Ontario, Ottawa's national dish is poutine, its main religion is hockey, and it has a maple-fueled population of just over 1 million at the last count. Donna Ellen Jones was born there on Christmas Day in 1975, the younger sister to Jennifer and later the older sister to Derek, born 17 months later. Donna's upbringing was shaped by her parents. James, her father, was a hot-headed man, traditional, the kind of guy who believed a wife should honour her husband. Her mother, Irina, on the other hand, was lively and generous, much like Donna herself. Like many young women, Donna was burdened by self-consciousness, mostly about her weight and a lazy eye, but despite her inner battles, she was really popular. She had loads of friends who described her as things like absolute sunshine, a bowl full of jelly, prone to spontaneous dancing. She always had a smile on her face. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find a photograph that didn't show her absolutely beaming. But it wasn't all fun. She had her head screwed on as well. She put herself through college and university and went on to excel in a civil service job with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. She was earning good money, helping friends who needed it, and she lived with her parents until 2005, carefully saving until she managed to pay off all her student debts, and eventually, at the age of 29, she bought herself this little house in the Bay Shore area of Ottawa. Donna was that person that every group of friends needs, the one who organised the fun times, going for dinner, playing sports, or skating along the frozen canals in winter. But despite being enormously social, her inner demons cursed her with anxiety. And when it came to romance, she was unmistakably shy. She told her therapist that she was terrified of being alone, that the only thing missing in her life was a man. She just wanted to be loved. That is until the summer of 2005, when a mutual friend introduced Donna to Mark Hutt, who played on the same baseball team. He was a roofer of the same age, a man with a troubled upbringing, but he was, as Donna would insist, turning his life around. Things moved very quickly for the couple. She soon moved him into the new house she'd saved so eagerly to buy, but the glaring red flags began to appear almost as fast. Mark would call Donna every 15 minutes if she was out with friends who would overhear their conversations on the phone, when he'd shout at Donna, call her all sorts of hideous names in fits of jealous rage, and when they called her at home, they'd hear the unmistakable click on the line, as Mark picked up a second receiver to listen in. She always made excuses for him, always had to dash off from social gatherings to get home. She started to become more and more withdrawn, less available to meet with friends and family. Then the physical injuries began to appear, bruises, cuts, hand-shaped marks on her skin that she always had an excuse for. She'd walked into something, fallen over, or been bitten by one of Mark's dogs. Then in 2006, on a trip to Disney World, the couple fought the entire time. But Donna still said yes when Mark proposed to her there. Months later, when she found her perfect dress and tiara, she called her new fiancé super excited. He just wanted to know if she'd done the laundry. And after the engagement, the abuse still escalated. Donna slowly stopped looking after herself. She wasn't doing her hair or dressing well for work. She'd stopped caring. A month before their wedding the following year, instead of a bachelorette party, her friends staged an intervention, where they each read a heartfelt, personalised speech to Donna, begging her not to marry him and instead go to a shelter they'd arranged for her. But the intervention failed. In desperation, her friends pulled out of the wedding, even her bridesmaids, but she went ahead with it anyway. Her brother Derek said they used to speak every day, but she grew more and more withdrawn. On a random visit to the house, he noticed she'd been buying Mark expensive toys. A new truck, an ATV, a pool table, snowmobile. There were punch holes all over the walls of the house. He said that after the marriage, Donna became cold, suspicious, fearful. She wasn't herself. She was a drone. She seemed dazed, almost medicated. 4 years of abuse had turned her infectious smile into a vacant stare, and he noticed the physical injuries getting even worse. She had a broken wrist that needed surgical pins just to hold it together. Apparently, she'd slipped on some rocks. By the hot summer of 2009, Donna was wearing turtlenecks, long sleeves and heavy makeup, just to hide the cigarette burns and ever-growing list of other injuries. She now weighed only 101 pounds, had a split lip that just wouldn't heal, a limp that never went away, and burns on her hands that were of course the result of a cooking mishap. Mark told Donna repeatedly that he would end his own life if she ever left him. He was dependent on her. He'd declared bankruptcy shortly after moving into her house, and she began to pay off his debts whilst creating her own, buying him his expensive gifts, taking over his vehicle payments and paying his medical bills. He'd bled her dry, completely used her up. Mark Hutt abused his wife physically, psychologically, and financially. Donna's performance at work had slipped too. Her shifts were interrupted by frequent angry calls from Mark, and her boss was worried about her. In late November of 2009, she called in sick with a cold, but he knew something wasn't right. He made a call to police to voice his concerns, but it was never followed up, and so he decided to stage another intervention at work the next time she came into the office, away from Mark. But there was no next time.
What is your emergency?
Oh, my wife's not breathing. My wife, I just woke up. My wife's dead.
Make sure she's on a firm, flat surface on her back.
She is.
Open her mouth by tilting her head back slightly. If you see a foreign object, gently remove it.
There's nothing in there.
Excellent.
A police officer arrived in minutes, and the first thing he noticed was an open window. This struck him as odd in the depths of a Canadian winter, but when he entered the house, he quickly realised why. It was a vain attempt to mask the pungent, decomposing stench, an odour he described as acrid, sickly, and unlike anything he'd ever encountered before. In the basement, he found Donna's body, in a t-shirt and soiled pyjama bottoms, lying on a makeshift mattress made from a pile of dirty couch pillows. A first responder was horrified at what she saw. 40% of Donna was covered in 3rd and 4th degree burns that were putrid and weeping with infection, so severe that her t-shirt stuck to the septic wounds as the medic lifted it to inspect her. She described Donna as looking though she'd been dragged behind a car on a gravel road. She had 2 black eyes and various cuts and scrapes. Her face was so swollen that a paramedic couldn't even open her eyes to check her pupils. Mark Hutt was apparently agitated and hysterical. He said Donna had burnt herself by falling into a fire pit 12 days earlier, but refused to go to hospital. He'd treated her pain himself with Tylenol, given her puffs from his asthma inhaler when she had difficulty breathing, and fed her Benadryl to avoid any allergic reactions. According to him, just 3 hours earlier, Donna was alive and excitedly talking about Christmas gifts. This was impossible according to Donna's pathologist. Forensic evidence proves she'd died roughly 12 hours before he called 911. Donna's cause of death was septic shock from the infection due to her untreated burns, which caused multiple organ failure. And these were no burns from a fire pit. They didn't have what was described as an upwards pattern, but a downwards one, indicative of scalding rather than flames. The most severe burns were on her back, proving that Donna was crouching as boiling water was poured over her. And the pattern also showed unburnt areas, in the shape of arms crossing her body, in a protective pose. She knew the burns were coming. Mark Hutt was taken in for questioning, and by now his fire pit story had changed.
My wife has never spoken to me the way she spoke to me 2 weeks ago. She basically told me that she was going to go with somebody else, that I wasn't I wasn't going to be a father. That, because I do, you know what I mean? I'm not perfect. I'm not a perfect person. I get stressed out just like everybody else. And it all started one day. I was making spaghetti in the kitchen. And I wanted to make enough for 2 weeks because my wife loves spaghetti. She loved my spaghetti. She loved it to death. So I was making a pot. I was boiling water for the noodles. And she came up behind me and she said something about just like, this isn't working, this isn't happening, I'm gonna cheat on you, basically. Like, I'm you know what I mean? If things don't work out, I'm going, you know, and she kept just saying it and putting it in my head, and putting it in my head, and putting it in my head. Bills in our house have been stacked up higher than you can imagine. I've been going through things with my father, everything like that, and when she said that to me, the water was boiling, and she was behind me, and I thought she had left the room. Instead of leaving the room, she was behind me, she was crouched down, and she was getting Tupperware out of the thing to bring for work. And I don't know why, I don't know what I did, but the next thing I knew, I hit that thing, man, I wanted to just, you know what I mean? I was so frustrated, I just wanted to you know, get my frustrations out.
Okay.
And when I hit that pot, she was behind me, and it just drenched her. And after that, I looked at her and I said, sweetheart, we need to go to a hospital. And she said, I don't want to go. I don't want to go to a hospital. She was afraid for me to get in trouble, and I said, I don't care. Just go to a hospital. Please, we can deal with this together. It's an accident. We can get through it. She didn't want to go. I begged. I pleaded with her. She made up a story to her parents saying she was going to Cornwall for work. And she actually did have a cold. She called her work and said she had a cold, that she was staying home, and she wanted to heal at home. And I told her, I said, we can't do this. We have to get to a hospital. That went on for about a week of me changing bandages, staying up all night making sure she's okay.
She loved my spaghetti. She loved it to death.
He said that without the faintest hint of irony. And through all that dry-eyed crying, he really painted himself as the hero. But other autopsy findings tell a much darker story. Although Donna did have bandages on her fingers and left forearm, the majority of her burns were left undressed, including those on her back, the deepest ones. And as for the rest of her body, well, there was barely an inch of Donna that wasn't marked by some form of physical abuse. As well as 40% of her skin having been inflicted with appalling burns, she had 7 calloused ribs, all healed untreated breaks, likely caused by kicks. In addition to these, there were 2 newly fractured ribs. She had a broken nose, 2 black eyes, countless cuts, bruises, scabs and scrapes all over her head, knees and legs. All of these injuries were caused after Donna was scalded 12 days earlier. She had fresh trauma to her scalp, a broken left finger, a fractured right wrist, and an earlier break in her forearm known as a nightstick fracture, caused by raising her arm to protect herself from a blunt force impact. But one of the most disturbing things the pathologist found were 29 small holes puncturing her skin, all over her body. Within each was a lead pellet, fired from this air pistol and this high-powered air rifle, both of which were found inside the home. Each pellet was embedded roughly 1 centimetre inside her, which meant that they'd all been fired from close range. As a result, Donna was also beginning to suffer the early effects of lead poisoning. And the pattern of the pellets wasn't random. They'd been deliberately shot into her feet, legs, shoulders and arms, some of them through her septic wounds. Mark Hutt tortured Donna Jones for the 12 days it took her to die from the burns. According to the pathologist, she'd been lying there dying and not doing anything else. The home itself was described as a house of horrors, packed with more telltale signs of abuse and violence. Forensic officers found bloodstains dotted and smeared on a number of walls, the hallway floor, and stair posts. They found handcuffs and an arsenal of weapons, including both the pellet guns, a bow and arrow, a sword, and this assortment of knives, 2 of which were stained with blood. They saw the punch holes in the walls, a bathroom door that had been smashed open, and more bloodstains on one of Donna's hair scrunchies, shoes, and the collar of a coat. Hundreds of handwritten notes were found around the home too, notes that pointed to Mark Hutt's Jekyll and Hyde persona. In one he'd call Donna a terrible wife, in another he'd describe her as his angel. Bagged up and neatly packed in boxes were Mark's clothes and the expensive toys Donna had literally bankrupted herself to buy for him, and according to his phone records he'd been making calls to an ex-girlfriend as his wife was lying in the basement. It looked like he'd used her up and was moving on. Donna also made calls after the scalding, whilst lying battered with oozing burns covering almost half her body, but she always covered for Mark, and never once asked for help. She even spoke to her mum to tell her that she was just sick, and that she needn't worry because her Mark was taking care of her.
Don't worry about me though, okay?
Yeah, that's something
I got my mark here.
You got what?
I got my mark here.
Oh, okay.
Days later, Mark Hutt was again brought in for questioning, confronted with the autopsy evidence. This time he was a murder suspect and not a grieving husband. The officer conducting the interview told Mark that he's never seen such a battered body in 30 years of police work.
She's got broken ribs. She's got a broken nose. She's got cuts behind her ear. She's got approximately 30 pellets in her. What kind of life did this woman have?
Hutt's response was to attempt to paint his wife as being clumsy and accident-prone. She was constantly tripping over the dogs or the vacuum cleaner. He remembered the time when she'd fallen and broken a wrist, a time when he'd elbowed her in the nose accidentally in his sleep, and the time he'd accidentally hit her with a couple of pellets when the pair were shooting at his trailer, maybe a few more when he was intoxicated. 29 pellets. He said he could understand a negligence charge, but nothing more. The officer asked Mark if he would rather be known as a diabolical murderer or someone who needed help with his anger issues.
My dad hit me when I was a kid.
I believe that.
My dad used to drink. My mother was a drunk. Her boyfriend used to kick the crap out of me.
The trial began on May 8, 2013 and lasted 4 weeks. Mark Hutt pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of criminal negligence causing death. The prosecution rejected this plea and argued that he was guilty of first-degree murder. Mark's defense lawyer Lorne Goldstein didn't deny he'd broken Donna's bones. He didn't deny that he'd deliberately scalded her with boiling water, or that he'd fired dozens of pellets into her skin from point-blank range. Instead, he argued that the prosecution hadn't sufficiently proven that it was his intention for her to die. Goldstein conceded that Mark had tortured Donna beyond comprehension, but also accused the prosecution of attempting to persuade the jury of his guilt by making them hate him, rather than looking at the evidence. He said, Hutt is guilty of criminal negligence, but not of murder. He needs to be punished, and he will be, but he needs to be convicted of the right offence. Donna was his greatest protector. If he wanted to kill her, he had ample ways to kill her and get rid of the evidence. No witnesses took the stand in his defence. The prosecutor, Vicky Bear, argued that there was no way Mark hadn't seen his wife crouching in their tiny kitchen. He'd deliberately scalded her after 4 years of barbaric abuse. She said, Hutt wanted Donna to die, ensured she would die. All that was left was for him to hide it from authorities. Even after her skin was peeling, after she was literally rotting and stinking, Mark Hutt continued to torture Donna. Only when there was no danger her voice would be heard, only when he could control the story did he call 911. Donna had outlived her usefulness for Hutt. He had taken all she had to live for. The jury were also shown this receipt for hot dog buns bought the day Donna was scalded. It was used to dispute Mark's claim that he was making pasta that evening. Multiple witnesses took the stand for the prosecution. The jury heard from Donna's pathologist and listened in shock to the excessive list of injuries he found during her autopsy. A burns expert, Dr. Joel Fish, took the stand and said this: If the victim walked into my burn unit, I would immediately put her on a high dose of morphine, just out of pure humanity. She would have been in exquisite pain. He said that he would have placed Donna in a medically induced coma and performed skin grafts on her, and had she received proper medical treatment, her chance of survival would have been virtually 100%. Dr. Fish also dismissed the idea that Donna physically prevented Mark from taking her to hospital, because someone in septic shock would be far too weak to physically hit and scream. Another person to take the stand was Deborah Ann Sinclair, a domestic violence expert and Crown witness, who testified that Donna was likely snared in what's known as a trauma bond. This bond was likely formed through a mixture of savage abuse and sporadic displays of affection, creating a deep psychological hold over Donna. It was then maintained by preying on her insecurities, exploiting her nurturing side and positioning himself as a victim in order to gain sympathy. Sinclair explained that victims of this type of abuse often only consider the consequences for the abuser, not for themselves, so they protect them even at their own expense. The detective on this case, Michael Hudson, said one of the hardest things about this case was seeing Donna's family, friends and co-workers who tried to intervene, wondering if they could have saved her. Everyone did everything they could possibly do, he said. There's only one villain here, and he's going to jail for a long time. It took the jury less than a day to deliberate, and on June 7, 2013 they found Mark Hutt guilty of first-degree murder. It carried an automatic sentence of life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years, the maximum penalty in Canada. Afterwards, Donna's little brother Derek said this.
An evil man was put to jail for evil crimes done to my sister, and he will pay for the rest of his life. The justice system prevailed, and the dear Lord will take care of him in the afterlife.
How much of a toll has this taken on your family?
It's taken an enormous toll. It's such a negative impact for someone to die so young, so senseless. I mean, all she wanted to do was have a loving, caring family, and this is what she got from an evil man.
Donna's voice was silenced by Mark Hutt. Is her voice speaking out now?
She is now, loud and clear.
What is she saying?
She's saying that nobody can do this to anybody, and that if you need help, get help. Please, don't allow it to happen. Get help. There's lots of support networks out there. You deserve better. You don't need to suffer anything. You are all good people. You just have a bad situation, and there's lots of doors that you can open, that people will open for you to get through it, to move on.
What do you want to say to Mark Hutt?
I have nothing to say to him.
What an awful case, one of the hardest ones I've done. I don't really have an awful lot to say about it other than to echo Derek's statement and say that if any of this story resonated with you, if any of it sounded all too familiar about you or a loved one, then please reach out. Help is out there, even if it's just to get the ball rolling, to speak to someone or get some advice. Reach out. Bye.